Thanks for clicking. My name is Mark Mitchell. I'm a mortgage broker here in London, Ontario. With the Canadian election just a few weeks away, tonight we had our first and last English-speaking debates as the 5 leaders of the 5 major political parties gathered to debate issues of the day. The debate definitely got heated, or as heated as Canadian election debates get.
I am sorry, Mr. Trudeau, you've had the most time tonight. I'm sorry, Mr. Trudeau, we are now moving. Let Mr. Singh in.
For 10 months or more.
Mr. O'Toole, let Mr. Singh in.
Mr. O'Toole, richest
respond.
billionaires
Mr. Singh,
pay their fair share for once.
Yikes. But as heated as the debate did get, I think it's important to do a brief recap over the issues that were covered surrounding the real estate and mortgage market. Over the past 18 months, Canada has seen our real estate market go through the roof, and as such, the 3 main political parties, NDP, Liberal, and Conservatives, have all released very ambitious plans, to say the least, to help make housing more affordable, cooler housing market, and help recover the economy. So I just want to do a brief recap of the top 3 real estate issues that were raised during the debate, and then follow up by the top 3 issues that weren't raised during the debate, which I think are almost more telling what was not said than what was actually said. So we'll go through the top 3 issues that were raised, the top 3 issues that weren't raised, and the implications of what was said, and like I said, what more importantly, what was not said by the leaders of the debate. One of the issues that I found really interesting that was brought up was whether or not the NDP was more concerned with the first-time home buyers or the people that already own homes, or the older people that already have equity and have seen the equity in their homes go through the roof in the last couple of months and years.
More important to you, helping younger people get access to the market or allowing older Canadians who rely on the value of their homes to live?
This is a really important issue with Canadian real estate and really gets down to what the crux of the housing issue is. Canadian politicians really have to wrestle with whether or not they make housing more affordable for first-time home buyers to get into the market. But when they do that, if, say, housing prices drop by 10 or 20%, that hurts people who are already in the market. So either way, of those 2 groups, somebody is going to get hurt, which is what makes policymaking so difficult. For his part, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh definitely seemed to indicate that he was more concerned with those first-time home buyers, those people trying to enter into the market, than he was with those people that already are homeowners.
And when I spoke to people, I go door to door in my riding of Burnaby, people who've got beautiful homes. I ask them, what's the #1 concern? They say housing. And I kind of look around at their house and say, well, you've got a home. They say, well, I'm not worried for myself. I've got a place, but I'm worried about my kids. And they're more concerned that their kids will never be able to find a home than their own circumstances, because they're okay. They are worried about their kids, and the reality is it is impossible for young people to even imagine buying a home, let alone renting a place that's in their budget. So we've got to get the big money out of housing.
And I mean, this issue has been echoed in polls that we actually went over on this channel a few months ago about parents being more and more concerned about the ability of their children to buy a home than they were about their own equity in their home. I think it was 75 to 85% of respondents in a poll a few months ago said that they were more concerned about their children being able to buy houses, and that whole issue really was reflected in this debate, or at least in this small part with Jagmeet Singh. This question didn't get asked of the other leaders, so it was really just Jagmeet Singh that had an answer on it, but I definitely think he's leaning more towards those first-time home buyers than he is people who already have homes and have gained the most from this huge rise in equity that we've seen in the past 18 months, but even before that. Second, and what I thought was really important, was the mention of how much money Canada is borrowing. As we all know, our debt has gone through the roof over the past 18 months, last 2 years, as COVID reared its ugly head and the government spent billions and billions of dollars. The biggest issue with all of this government spending is that it does hurt our overall financial stability in Canada, and more importantly, it makes raising interest rates even more worrisome if it has to happen in the future. As I think Chrystia Freeland and Prime Minister Trudeau has said in the past, the government is able to borrow very, very cheaply right now, so it's not that big of a deal when rates are down around 2%. But when you're borrowing over $424 million per day, as mentioned by Erin O'Toole at least 3 times that I noted.
Mr. Trudeau is borrowing every day $424 million, and he's causing an inflation crisis. And he's making it worse with, as I said, almost $500 million of borrowing per day. There's real risks on the horizon. He says he doesn't worry about monetary policy and inflation. Now he's saying he doesn't ever intend to balance the budget. He's spending $424 million a day more than Canada's bringing in.
Well, if interest rates rise at that kind of debt level over the next 3, 4, 5 years, if they get to that 3, 4, and 5% mark, well, that makes managing that debt on a countrywide basis even more difficult, and you have to pull those interest payments from somewhere. So that can really hamper our ability to invest in our economy, which can help which would hamper our ability to create jobs, economic development, etc., etc., etc. If you think how much a rise in interest rates would affect you going from 2% to say 5%, think what that could do to a country's finances and what it was able to pay for. Finally, the last really interesting real estate issue that was mentioned was the tax on the primary residence, and I think that the leader, Erin O'Toole, wasn't exactly truthful, so I just wanted to address that real quick in this video. They talked about the tax on the primary residence, which is capital gains tax on your primary residence, which was a big issue a few months ago when RBC suggested that the government impose a capital gains tax on your primary residence as a means to cooling down the housing market. Everybody lost their minds, and we did a few videos on it back then as well. Erin O'Toole suggested that Prime Minister Trudeau would be doing something similar, and even went as far to mention that it was on page 14 of the campaign document.
So Canadians are worried you're going to be taxing their primary home sale. Your advisors have said it. Untrue. Your candidates have said it. It's on page 14 of his policy book. He's introducing a new tax on the sale of homes.
Now, I've been through this real estate portion of the campaign document forwards and backwards multiple times, and there's no mention of taxing the primary residence or imposing a capital gains tax on your primary residence. What is mentioned is that the Liberal campaign wants to make it so you have to live in a new house that you purchased for 12 months before you can sell it without being taxed as a flip. So what that is meant to do is to stop the speculators, stop the house flippers from buying a house, holding it, and then selling it for a massive profit. That's one of the measures being taken by the Liberal campaign to cool down the housing market. So I think that's what Erin O'Toole was referring to, but Trudeau is definitely, there is no mention anywhere of them taxing the sale of your primary residence. Now that we've gone through the top 3 issues that were brought up vis-a-vis the real estate market, I want to briefly go over the top 3 issues that were not brought up that I really expected to be talked about, as they're huge issues, and I'm going to explain why very briefly. GDP. Our economy just shrunk by 0.7% at a time when our inflation rate's at 3.7%. This is a big issue, and the fact that our GDP shrunk, not being brought up, astounds me. It astounds me, one, because it's a big issue for the country. We could be looking at stagflation. And with the country reopening and the lockdowns ending, you would think that we would be ramping back up our economic development, and that's been predicted by a lot of key experts and the banks in the past. But the fact that our economy shrunk, well, that's really not a good sign, and you would think it would be brought up during an election campaign, especially an election debate. Maybe not by Prime Minister Trudeau, because it doesn't look good on him, but at least by Jagmeet Singh or Erin O'Toole. I would have expected them to bring up this negative economic data, and as far as I can tell, there was not one mention of the word GDP throughout the entire 2-hour debate. That I find astounding. Second, and this is a big one, the Homebuyers Bill of Rights was not mentioned throughout the entire 2 hours. The Homebuyers Bill of Rights, introduced by the Trudeau campaign, which brings out stuff like an end to blind bidding, which there was a hugely negative reaction to that, a guarantee that the banks guarantee mortgage deferrals in the event of job loss. No mention whatsoever about any of the points in the Homebuyers Bill of Rights. One, these are huge points that would really change the real estate market and the mortgage market in Canada. So just those points alone you'd think would at least deserve some airtime. But almost more important than that, a Bill of Rights. That's a big thing. If it were to be considered something as big as a Bill of Rights, if they're going to name it that, one would think that's what we would consider it as. For it not to even be brought up and it's called a Bill of Rights, I don't know if, of course, naming is naming, but I don't know if the intention was for a constitutional amendment or to be some grand big bargain. But obviously, if it's not even being brought up, not only by Erin O'Toole or Jagmeet Singh, but almost the inverse of the economy, not even being brought up by Trudeau. I mean, if he's not even going to bring it up in a nationally televised, only English debate, how serious can he be about its passage? And finally, and I'm a mortgage broker, so the mortgage part of the three campaigns directly affects my everyday life. So I've been really focused, and you should be too, because it will affect the real estate market and the mortgage market on the promises made for the mortgages, coming from the three main parties, the Liberal, the NDP, and the Conservative. No mention of the 30-year amortization on the part of the NDP, which would have major implications for insured mortgages, for equity, for the pricing of your mortgages, for how much you paid in interest, which let me tell you is of huge concern to most home buyers, how much they pay in interest. No mention of that whatsoever. Coming from Erin O'Toole, whose campaign promises to eliminate the stress test for renewing your mortgage. When the stress test came out, one of the biggest criticisms of the Liberal government was that it was going to make it harder for people to renew their mortgages, because if you got your mortgage at 2% and now you have to qualify at 5%, could make switching your mortgage much more difficult, which would give the banks even more power. They could charge you even more, and there's really nothing you could do about it because you couldn't move your mortgage. No mention, nothing. One of the biggest parts of Erin O'Toole's promises for the mortgage market, not one thing. And finally, as far as mortgages go, although the biggest omission from Trudeau was obviously the Home Buyers Bill of Rights. Did I make that clear? Obviously, that was his biggest omission, but he has seemed to have dropped this first-time homebuyer incentive, the co-ownership incentive, where the government matches your 5% down and then they own 5% of your house. Well, his campaign promised to change that, where it's sort of a deferred loan. So they loan you 5%. They don't own your house, but you have to pay it back. He's spent the last 2 years touting how important this co-ownership thing was, this first-time homebuyer incentive, and now he's going to do a major overhaul to it, and then doesn't even mention it. Again, how important is it to Prime Minister Trudeau if he's not even mentioning it in a debate? So, we've gone over the top 3 real estate issues that actually were mentioned in the Canadian debate. We had the major tension between old and young, first-time homebuyers versus those who have equity. We have the rising amount of debt, $424 million per day being borrowed by the Trudeau government. And finally, we had the tax on the sale of your principal residence, which, as far as I can tell, is non-existent, but Erin O'Toole still said that there was one, and I don't think there is. So that was a big issue throughout this year. And it looks like it was maybe a big oversight, maybe even a big lie by Erin O'Toole. But, like I said, even more important were what was not mentioned. Mainly our shrinking economy, the Homebuyers Bill of Rights, no mention, and no mention of the major promises that each leader has made to alter the mortgage market almost fundamentally in Canada. No mention at all from any of the leaders of the 30-year amortization, the end to the stress test, or the co-ownership program so heavily touted by the Trudeau government for the last 2 years. Now, obviously, the leaders did have a whole lot of stuff that they wanted to get through. Obviously, there's real estate and mortgages aren't the only issue facing Canada right now. Who knew? Obviously, there's COVID recovery, there's reconciliation, there's a whole host of other issues that we definitely need to go through. But like I said, I was even more surprised not only by what was mentioned, but really by what was not mentioned throughout the debate. We'll have more updates on the reaction to this debate, and obviously there'll be polls coming out to see who came out ahead, and we'll have updates on the election as it continues to unfold. We've got a few weeks left, so I'm sure there'll still be lots of updates out. If you like this video, click like and subscribe to get those videos, and thanks for watching.